right, welcome listeners. Welcome to another podcast of Access Granted, where we strive to bring you the lessons learned from the modern cybersecurity world, especially around identity and access management. World is changing. Applications are moving from data centers, four walls confinement to a cloud world, multiple clouds, hybrid multi-cloud world, and things are also moving from a monolith architecture to a distributed microservices architecture. And we want to make sure that whatever we are learning from customers and partners and in general from market, we share the learning to the rest of the community and customers so they can also leverage this as part of their modern security posture. Focus of this podcast is around zero trust security, around especially around zero trust authentication and authorization in general. Today, I'm very happy about this podcast because we are going to be talking about two things, which I'm personally very excited about. One is we are going to be talking about this new category called CPAM, Cloud PAM, not PAM in the cloud, because we are not talking about legacy moving into the cloud, but more about Cloud PAM, which is about solving the problems, leveraging the native capabilities of various clouds. And second, also very excited about the guest that we have today with decades of experience in identity and access management, as well as he himself has been a practitioner, defender in the security space, and he always have kept himself to the modern trends in terms of how the landscape is changing and what problems, new problems are arising, which the cybersecurity teams, whether DevOps teams or IEM teams, needs to be aware of and are taking steps to solve those problems in a modern way. Because when you have a proactive mindset and you are looking to modernize your posture, it gives you a lot of benefits around unification, operational simplicity, and cost efficiencies. So, without further ado, I would like to welcome John Morton, who is a field CTO for Britive and has extensive experience in different customers working as a cybersecurity practitioner, a trusted advisor for the industry, have connection with many CISOs where he share his learning and get learning from them as well. Welcome to the show, John. Really happy to see you.
Thank you, Noman. Thank you. Yeah, man. I like to tell people back in my day, we used to rack and stack servers, and even then, identity wasn't considered a part of security, which, that's still questionable now, but it was an operational function of creating accounts, passwords, giving access, and then it eventually evolved into what we have today. So I'm excited to be on the show here.
Fantastic, John. Before we dive into some of the current problems that customer are seeing, maybe you can give a little bit background about yourself in terms of what industries have you worked in. It's just for people to resonate and align to how do they do their operations from a security perspective.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, kind of like you mentioned, I'm a field CTO here at Britive. I normally say it's a fancy way of bridging the gap between sales, engineering, and product as an evangelist for customers. Well, why do I have the credence or ability to say that? I've been a practitioner. I've done different vendor things, and it goes back to most people don't know this, but I actually used to work in the submarine fleet, special projects, undersea research and development, USS Jimmy Carter. Believe it or not, we actually had machines on board, both Windows and Linux machines in the early 2000s. And we had Active Directory, we had mail that came in. And, from that foundation, I started, from there moving out, ended up working at Veterans Affairs, Postal Service, and ended up really having a good time, always as a defender at Oppenheimer Funds, where I had the most exposure and really growth in purchasing products, evaluating products, deploying new products. It was more of a better role for me. That was when I met some interesting individuals. This was around 2010, 2011 at an identity company called Avexa on the vendor side. So as I was a practitioner up until then, I love telling stories about working with audit, compliance, risk, security, new tools. And at that point is when I switched over to the vendor side. The team that I worked with there, they were like, you're really good at articulating the business value of why we're trying to deploy a lot of these security products. And we went and weaponized that. So I worked in the identity space for a few years, had an acquisition, ended up in the endpoint space, EDR. Ended up in the digital rights management space, ended up in the IPS, IDS, network defense space, and then came back to Britive. And to your point about CPAM, why I really liked coming here is over the years, I've always applied the knowledge I knew, combining both business, right? What is the business reason we're trying to do anything? I feel that's gotten lost recently, but we'll touch that in a minute. Combining the business drivers with security posture, right? Why are we doing anything? The CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. How does that translate between I just want to buy a new cool tool to, hey, this drives revenue for the business? I've really been always able to articulate that value, having seen that full gamut there. Naman.
That's fantastic, and I think we are in a way lucky that audience is listening to someone with experiences vast and diverse as yours. So let me start with. I think this episode focus is around zero trust, specifically zero trust authorization, right? And when we talk about zero trust authorization and privilege access, the term just in time, the term privilege access management is not new. It's been out there. I think that's one of the reasons it can be confusing for some of the customers and partners where they say, okay, what's new? Why are we talking about this now? Right? And I'm sure that there are industry leaders out there who have done a fantastic job in terms of solving problems around privilege access and just in time in the older legacy world. But now things are sort of shifting in terms of the dynamics, right? So maybe you can talk about what has changed and why the customers needs to rethink, especially the privilege access management and zero trust authorization. And one of the key reason is also that if I look at modern threats, and even if you can type in ChatGPT about give me like five threats or breaches that have happened in the past 12 months, you will see several risky breaches, right? Reputational damage, intellectual theft, data exfiltration, you name it. You will find the main root cause of those breaches is around privilege access, around authorization. Somebody was able to steal the password and able to get in, right? And they're now able to go across and do lateral movement and do nasty things that we don't want. So explain what has changed and why it's important for people to rethink, and come up with something new and different as opposed to a better version of old, right? Because that's where I think the optimization comes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, one of the main things I like to hit on is over the course of my career, I've had interviews and job offers from different interesting organizations, including the National Security Agency, Google, AWS. I'm talking in the beginning, right? And I always found it interesting their interview process. So they'd always start with something like, what do you understand about the TCP handshake? What do you understand about the OSI model? What do you understand about directory services, file structures? And that point, not a lot has changed in that perspective, right? There are still some overarching capabilities. And in my opinion, to be an actual good security practitioner, you have to understand the basics first. You can't exploit something if you just don't fundamentally understand how it works. So, that's being said, what has changed though is the platform and the delivery by which a lot of things are being done now. Let me give you a case in point here, right? This is one of my favorite examples. Back in my day, I'm an old guy stroking my beard. Back in my day, when I used to go and create access for someone, I would go into Active Directory on premise, ADUC, anybody familiar with it, Active Directory users and computers, create a user, give them a password, set up their email and give them groups that gave them access. And somebody realized at that point, well, that might be insecure if we give them too much. What if we just go create a second account that has super admin access and we protect those credentials adamantly well? That was a 20-year-old idea. And current solutions around privilege access are still doing that today. Let's create a secondary service account and do this. Where that got turned upside down, though, to your point, Naman, what changed? Things like AWS. AWS Cloud fundamentally does not have to work that way. You do not have to create a user account at all. You do not have to create a password. You do not have to give them access. What they did was they inverted kind of the model from an account based access to a resource based access, meaning you could do something like role assumption to an AWS object in a serverless or an ephemeral world. So, although the core fundamentals are there, everything's still the same sort of networking, permissioning. It's the approach of, let's just give them service accounts that are overprivileged and protect the credentials. That's where people are failing.
Got it. Got it. Very insightful. Insightful. So, in a way, what you're saying is um, the credentials are bound to get stolen, right?
Definitively.
So, what you're saying is there needs to be a defense in depth in terms of what if you can have a posture where even if your passwords or credentials get stolen, you still have a security in place, and
Yeah.
it needs to work in such a way where customers may be leveraging Google BigQuery or AI machine learning. AWS, it's very good in many different services, also getting bigger in AI as well. Azure, right? Oracle. So how can you basically solve that problem where you are not just relying on passwords or credentials, but you still are providing a secure layer? So is that am I getting this correctly?
Oh, yeah. It's like you're an experienced podcast host here, Noman, because you're leading the witness. So, yeah, real quick, I'll clear something up too that I see a lot of confusion around, and I'll marry these things together. So, there absolutely is another way. There is a better way, right? And it's not much more effort. That's the other thing, right? Risk versus reward. It's not a lot of effort. So, let's go back to that term zero trust we kind of talked about. Whenever we say that, people always come from the purview of what they understand. I won't be too cruel, but people steal good words and they use them the wrong way. Identity and access management is a perfect word, perfect combination of words for what smart organizations do, but unfortunately now that's a GRC thing, right? Same thing with CASB, Cloud Access Security Broker. Excellent idea, functionally not what it does. Zero trust, I want to avoid from falling into that landscape because when I say it, most people go, "Oh, well, I have zero trust network architecture. My networks are segmented, they can't." Zero Trust is an overarching program that includes network architecture. Why am I saying all this? Back to Noman's point about why should we do something different? I guarantee you credentials are going to be compromised. I guarantee you right now, quote me, the AI overlords will say quantum computing has guaranteed credentials will be compromised. But that's not the end of the story, right? Even if you add MFA, you add a blood sample, eyeball retinal scale, like Minority Report, there is another option. And if you look at zero trust definitively, what it's talking about, this is it. I use the DoD, Department of Defense framework to highlight what they mean by zero trust. There are two types of decision points. One being authentication, an authentication decision. Do you have the credentials? What do you have? What do you know? What can you do? The roots of authentication. But there's also an authorization decision. Once you've validated you are who you say you are, what should I give you access to? Is it a particular resource? Is it a particular data? Is it a particular, by resource, I mean compute. Data, I mean, directories, files, services, machines. So authorization and authentication can actually be separated. Most folks just aren't aware of this, Noman. They're used to the traditional way of I'm going to give them an overprivileged service account with all the access it needs, and they're combining the two. You can actually separate out authentication and authorization.
Fantastic. So basically, what you're saying, and I think this is why, if I go back to some of the recent breaches where the threat actors were able to steal the password, right? Yeah, let's say a support guy who may have over provisioned entitlements, right? And if you are able to get to that, because support for their job, they have to get access to certain things, which could be crown jewels, which could be sensitive in nature. So your focus or what you are saying is, you know, keep the credentials, secure it in whatever way you want. But even if somebody is able to steal the passwords or credentials, you still are protecting your assets because you still needs to have just in time permissions for only the time that you need it for.
That's exactly it. So to just double tap on that just a little bit, right? So even with the term JIT, just in time, what still many organizations and vendors are trying to do is they're still trying to provision that heavy load. They're still to other entities they call JIT. I'm going to give you a service account that's overprivileged just in time. And it's only time bound, so you're safe. That's still not stepping into the true depth of separating out authorization because like day to day, you may want to just keep doing whatever it is you're doing. Case in point, Snowflake or Salesforce. If I'm using Salesforce and I'm a day to day business user, and you're going to try to tell me I need a secondary account to do something, you just made my life hard. Why can't we keep giving them the access that they've always had? And when they want a special privilege, we give that special privilege to them after they jump through some hoops of maybe an approval, validating they're on the VPN, asking them to step up. I'm not saying forcing them to log in again just to do it. I'm saying for that privilege you want, you can jump through some hoops. I'll give you the privilege you need and you can continue to do your job. That is the separation of authorization and authentication definitively.
Brilliant, brilliant. So I think that's why I think there's a famous saying where these days they say that hackers don't break in, they just log in, right? Or they simply log in.
Oh, yeah.
So having that and looking at several breaches that have happened in the past, right? Having this type of a security approach is very promising to provide that zero trust authorization and defense in depth. Now, a lot of customers at this point, or people who are listening to this podcast, they might be thinking, so what's new? I am in my legacy world. I have my vendors that I've been working for the last 20 years. They're also saying that we do things in the cloud, right? They're also saying we do PAM, right? Not cloud PAM, but they're doing PAM in the cloud, right? So they lifted and shifted things in the cloud. So what's new, right? And I think a good way for people to understand is through use cases, right? So maybe you can cover some case studies, some use cases where for people it will be easier to understand that this is what you actually mean by decoupling authentication from authorization, right? And just in time permissions based on the cloud native capabilities.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, let's pick on probably my favorite environment ever, AWS. And this is where hey, anybody can come challenge me anytime they want. I'm open to have a beer and conversation, but traditional PAM, this traditional concept of an overprivileged service account completely falls down in AWS land. What does that mean? Two things. AWS moves super fast, right? When I think of who are my consumers of AWS resources, use that environment, they're normally developer mindsets. They are building something, right? And what they're trying to do is leverage the cloud capabilities of AWS. AWS isn't exactly just a bunch of virtualized servers. It has its own unique services, things like S3, things like EC2, things like RDS, and they kind of streamline processes and make things easy. So AWS inherently wants you to use those tools, and I agree. So when you're trying to retrofit this classic idea of I need an overprivileged service account that has all this access, that doesn't work in AWS because, like I mentioned, one, their construct's different, and two, time. Some of the things that happen in AWS are, milliseconds, microseconds, nanoseconds. I need this privilege to do this function now, something like Lambda. A Lambda function wants to execute whatever it is it's doing. It doesn't want to wait for a service account to be created to get the credentials to log in. Logically, it does not work that way. It just needs the service, the permission to the resource it wants when it needs it, right? So that's where ephemerally, using tools like APIs, you can give a Lambda function the authorized privilege it needs when it needs it and take that away and still govern it all around, right? So AWS is the best example ever of using these sort of microservices and new functions and capabilities that are serverless and ephemeral that last literally for under 5 minutes. Traditional tooling, you just cannot accomplish these tasks. It's not feasible. It's not possible.
Great, great. And I think the same for from a customer perspective. I may be in AWS, I may be leveraging Snowflake, I may be leveraging GitHub, right? I may be using Databricks or Cloudera, right? I also have different flavors of Kubernetes environments. So from a posture perspective, I'm thinking that okay, AWS is great, but now I have this distributed environment, which is basically my new data center. How do I basically manage and get this modern approach, but in a way which unifies, right? For me,
Yeah.
so is this too good to be true, or there are actually solutions out there that actually can help with this overall unification of the modern posture management?
Yeah. There are solutions out there. And what I can notice about the smartest teams that I talk to and engage with, there's two camps. if they're trying to solve this problem around access, and it doesn't have to be just privilege, like a Lambda function doesn't need privilege access, it's just access generally. So if we're talking about access, there's two camps. When they're looking to unify and standardize what they're doing, you're right, across these disparate ecosystems. If they immediately lead with secrets, I know I got a lot of talking to do. I got a lot of educating to do. Hey man, this is an uphill battle. But if they lead with, I need an API first approach, these are the teams I know. They're thinking ahead. They've explored everything and they've realized the capabilities that APIs can drive with this sort of speed, right? They're not stuck on secrets. They're literally saying, we need to move fast. We know APIs can do it. This is how a lot of those platforms operate already. How do we unify and standardize really this by simplifying it with like that API framework that we just pull the levers on what we want in the speed and time we want with the control we want? Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect, perfect. And I think the same API, I would say, approach can also be extended then, like for example, in Britive's case, right? You have, it's a unification of privilege access approach towards, even Snowflake. So these days, you have all these data scientists working on AI and machine learning use cases where you have data lakes, different sources of data coming in, and they want to access that specific tables that maybe in Snowflake, maybe in S3, maybe in vector DB, right? So you need to have this just-in-time privilege access, capability to provide access to the right people to the right data sources as well.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so what I like about that idea is, the business units just want what they want. Let's not lose sight of why they're doing what they're doing. In Snowflake, for example, I talk a lot. They're one of my favorite people. I'm a huge fan. They're using data lakes for data warehousing and compute, right? And when security's trying to tell them you need to use this overprivileged static account coming from this PAM tool to do this function, you already lost them, right? They're doing dev functions, they're building warehouses, maybe they're secure, maybe they have non-sensitive data. They need to build data models, period. We should, as security practitioners, be meeting them in the middle and saying, look, we have to accept the risk and security for what you're doing. Here's the guardrails. If you use APIs, if you do everything with credentials, we're proud of you, but you also amplify that because you're using it programmatically with like one standard service account in Jupyter Notebook, you also need to decouple authorized access to remove and reduce risk from 24 by 7 access to, 30-minute access. That is huge value add. So in those cases, we always got to remember, what are the business units trying to do and how do we make their lives easier? Because if it's hard, that's what happens. You go ask anybody in cloud right now, they probably went through this evolution with AWS. AWS teams will always say, leave us alone, security. You don't understand what we're saying or what we're doing. That silos still persist everywhere. Same thing happens in Snowflake. You don't know what we're trying to do. Stop trying to cram this down our throat. If we can meet them halfway with unifying it, standardized, right? APIs, simplifying it for them. Hey, you write scripts, IAC scripts, as long as you use a specific tool that governs access, that controls it, everybody wins, man. Everybody wins.
Yeah, and so you are that's a fantastic answer. Thanks, John. Now you are basically as field CTO for Brightif, right? I'm sure that you talk to many customers on a daily basis and you talk to CISOs as well. What is that elevator pitch? Because obviously everybody is busy, right? Everybody is already has seen JIT and C and PAM and privilege access management. So what is that elevator pitch that you give that resonates with the CISOs in terms of understanding the problem and the urgency of it? Because everybody has priorities that they're running after.
Mhm.
You have to do AI projects. You have to do your intelligence projects. You have to do your as you said, the legacy ZTNA and cybersecurity that people understand, not really specifically focusing on access and authorization. So, what is that thing that resonates with CISOs in terms of understanding the value and the urgency of it?
Yeah, yeah. I always like I'm a keep it simple kind of guy, right? In the Navy, that's how we did everything. We used to teach 18-year-olds how to operate nuclear reactors on submarines. You got to keep it simple. Hot rock makes steam, pushes the boat. So when I talk to CISOs, I tell them like your job is to mitigate risk, right? And mitigating risk means when you have identity centric solutions, they should always be least privilege. Now, where Britive is the most unique thing around is Least privilege is literally zero standing privileges. If you do not have access to a resource, a group, a role, or a privilege, you have reduced the risk landscape radically from standing overprivileged to zero privileges at all, right? 24 by 7 to nothing, except when people need the privilege on demand. You've also balanced out the end user's needs to keep doing their job, right? So I try to remind them we're in the business of access management. We drive everything through APIs, unify, simplify, and secure how that's done, meeting people where they live with security guardrails, and still assigning the risk where appropriate, satisfying all the compliance mandates of least privilege and audit. That was a lot more than an elevator pitch, Noman, but normally I have people's interest because the CISOs especially feel the pain. If they make their users' lives hard, they're not going to last very long.
So in a way, if I basically say that if I have a team sitting offshore somewhere, everybody has a distributed workforce. People are logging from everywhere, and you have certain admins of a sensitive database, or Okta administrators, or admins to a license server, or things that you push. If you're a SaaS application, right? Not to mention CrowdStrike, but let's say if you're a SaaS application, and you are trying to do certain function that can impact thousands of your users. There is no reason why you need to have that access 24/7, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You basically need to, even if you're able to log in, or even if somebody is able to, steal your password or credential, you're able to log in. You do not have that access unless you ask for it or check out that permission for the time you need it for. So maybe if it's your 1 hour job, you get it for 1 hour, 8 hour, but you have that permission that was given to you to go and do your job, and then it's automatically getting taken away. Am I
Yeah,
understanding this correct?
you are correct. And I'll give you one more very important use case that recently came up, and it makes sense logically. Every CISO everywhere should care about leavers. What do I mean by a leaver? It's normally an IAM term, someone leaving the organization. John Morton gets hit by the lottery bus, he's going to go retire to Aruba. What are they nervous about? We got to go get his access out of our environment within 24 hours or whatever the SLA is. There are actual SLAs to clean him up, and John Morton could literally be everywhere. I get rooted in there. If you take this idea of what we're saying of you do not have standing access, sure they have an account. But if you went and audited what they have access to, they have access to nothing. If KPMG or EY or Deloitte is in your environment and they're saying, "Why is John Morton in the domain admins group when he was let go or he quit 3 weeks ago?" That doesn't exist if he's never in the group. So even in the lever scenario, if you don't give someone access, except on demand, to your point, with approvals, controls, when they leave, even if you forgot, even if you never deprovision the account and they can still log in, they do not have access to anything.
Fantastic. I think it's a true, I would say, proactive mindset, and I love this whole category of cyber prevention where you're not in a reactive mode. You're not a detect and respond. You're more like preventing it and designing the posture in the right way so you don't even get into that problem in the first place. So it's fantastic. And one of the things that I want to also find out from you is you talk to many customers, uh, and a lot of them, they are leveraging legacy tooling that that they may be used to in the old world, right? So what would be your advice to them? Maybe one or two key lessons learned. I'm sure that flexibility and trying to understand the modern solution is one, but in general, what is that one or two key pieces of advice do you want to give them in terms of redefining their posture, in terms of addressing the modern landscape that we are dealing with now?
Yeah. Yeah. So, when it comes to identity, don't think of it just as credentials. If you're doing that, you're wrong. I'm going to be bold in saying that, but if you think of identity and you think it's just passwords, and you are absolutely wrong. There is so much more to it, and it's intertwined in the world. So why am I saying that, right? Always be open-minded. If you've invested in tools and you're passing audit and that works, that's all you want to do. Also, again, but if you want to like look at real security posture, how to protect your environment, constantly grow and expand, maybe give a listen to this authorization piece, right? Although it does get lost, people always tend to hate sales reps. They're always, like a barking dog. Sometimes they have good info, right? So, listening to them and seeing where that fits in your organization, especially where there's a gap. And I'm saying it now, I have not in 4 years I have not seen otherwise. Cloud or something new is going to be that gap. So you can either decide, hey, I'm going to let these teams keep doing what they're doing. I turn a blind eye, willful ignorance, right? They get hacked. They didn't listen to me. Or you can double down and say, what are you all trying to do in that environment? And how can we work together to really make security a part of the business organization? Not a speed block, right? Not a roadblock to progress, but literally trying to say, hey, we want to go on this journey with you. Let's look at how we can unify, simplify, and secure everything. That is a great mantra for security holistically.
Fantastic. So I think that's to summarize, right? What I learned is, just relying on passwords and credentials is almost like a ticking time bomb, right? And if you need to have defense in depth, you need to look at
Yes.
dynamic, just-in-time privilege access management that understand the cloud native construct so that you can leverage that. And the most important thing is to be able to unify the policy management across any environment, right? And even to the on-prem world, by the way, right? So we cannot forget on-prem. And a lot of customers
Correct.
might be
Right.
saying that, hey, the CPAM looks good, but I also have this on-prem use cases, right? So before we end this call, maybe just one or two advice about for people who are really interested in cloud PAM, right, and solutions like
Mhm.
Britive, how can they handle the on-prem because they don't want to have a fragmented policy management or privilege access management approach.
Last thought, and I like being a little pointed, not because I'm cruel, but I like to highlight things because I'm telling you now, I'd like to share conversations over a drink with someone who thinks otherwise. Most folks, when it comes to on-premise world, they're right now complacent in accepting the norm. I am paying an exorbitant amount for the existing on-premise PAM solutions because they literally keep me in compliance. Wow. When they're looking to justify spend, they want to replace that spend, and that is a weird state to be in. You don't have to do it that way, right? There are other options, and it's about what are you trying to do? Are you trying to be compliant and also secure this ecosystem in a new way? Right? There are options, right? Here's case in point. I want somebody to call us out. What are you doing to protect Linux? 99% of folks I talk to, they know they have a footprint and immediately they try to diminish it. Oh, it's a small footprint. It's under control. Your PAM tools don't work there because they don't work like that, right? Linux isn't like Windows where I can have an overprivileged service account. So they immediately derail that. And then they also say, well, there is no compliance mandate necessarily to protect Linux because of how Linux is architected, the environment, right? They're like, well, it doesn't work there. So when we start questioning folks about that, what are you actually trying to do? If you're just trying to be compliant, good luck. Have your 18-month CISO run and enjoy it. If you're looking at real security, there are options. There are ways to manage authorized privileges across Linux, across Windows, across databases, on premise, right? There are ways to do what we're saying using even a SaaS tool to drive those actions. You just have to be open minded to it and consider honestly, am I just trying to be compliant or do real security?
Fantastic, and I love the access broker part of Britive where you're able to extend that same cloud operating model down to the on-prem world where you are able to provide the same privilege access just in time and still provide the compliance and auditability reports to cater to that requirements as well. So fantastic thoughts, John. I really appreciate you joining and sharing us what some
Absolutely.
insightful learnings of yours. If people wants to reach out to you or they want to have further follow-up discussions, where can they reach out and talk to you?
Yeah, I get a lot of solicitations on LinkedIn. Love it, right? People can email me. They can call Britive. Just give us a call and ask to talk to me. I'll try to make it work. Conferences too, like going to conferences, trying to educate people, find like-minded folks. So those are some methods.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. Really appreciate it, and I'm sure the listeners would learn a lot from this. And we all also welcome comments, feedback, input. Some things that you have learned. This podcast is all about sharing what we are learning in this dynamic world where things are rapidly changing. Use cases are coming up, left and right. Specifically, it could be a double-edged sword that you want to innovate, but at the same time, you also want to make sure that you have a security that's not hindering the speed and agility that cloud promises. So would come back with another episode, but thank you for listening. And John, thank you for joining today. Really appreciate it.